a love story turned nightmare. In the early 1990s, Canada was shocked by a story that sounded like fiction. The tale of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. They appeared to be the perfect couple. Young, attractive, charming, and outwardly in love. But beneath that image was a shared fascination with control, violence, and sexual domination. What began as a relationship filled with passion quickly transformed into one of the most disturbing criminal partnerships in Canadian history. The charming sadist, Paul Bernardo, grew up in Scarborough, Ontario, the same community that would later tremble under the terror of the Scarborough rapist. He was handsome, articulate, and outwardly confident, traits that made him popular among women. But Paul had a dark obsession. From a young age, he developed fantasies of humiliation and control, taking pleasure in the suffering of others. As he entered adulthood, these fantasies turned into real acts of violence. Between 1987 and 1990, Bernardo assaulted numerous women, leaving a trail of fear and trauma in his wake. The press would later give him his first moniker, the Scarborough Rapist. Meeting Karla Homolka. In 1987, Paul met Karla Homolka at a pet convention in Toronto. Their connection was immediate and electric. Karla, then just 17, was drawn to Paul's charisma and intensity. She found his dominance thrilling, even when it turned cruel. Paul, in turn, was fascinated by Karla's willingness to submit and to please him no matter the cost. Their relationship was built not on love, but on a shared addiction to power and pain. Friends and family saw them as the perfect couple, unaware of the horror that brewed behind closed doors. The obsession with virginity. Paul's obsession with virgins became a fixation that ruled their relationship. He grew increasingly angry that Karla was not one, blaming her for what he called imperfection. Desperate to please him, Karla made a chilling decision that would change everything. In December 1990, she offered her younger sister Tammy as a gift to Paul. They drugged Tammy using anesthetic stolen from Karla's workplace and assaulted her while she was unconscious. But the plan went horribly wrong. Tammy stopped breathing. Instead of calling for help, they cleaned the scene and told police it was an accident. Tammy's death was ruled as misadventure, but it marked the beginning of their murderous descent. The birth of the killer couple. After Tammy's death, something shifted. The line between fantasy and reality had been permanently erased. The guilt that might have stopped an ordinary person seemed to fuel Paul and Karla's hunger for control. Together, they began hunting victims, young, innocent girls who resembled Tammy. They lured, tortured, and murdered them, often filming the assaults as if creating trophies of their crimes. The recordings showed Karla's participation, sometimes laughing, sometimes comforting the victims as Paul inflicted pain. They became known as Canada's Ken and Barbie Killers, a nickname as grotesque as it was ironic. The victims, Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. Leslie Mahaffey was just 14 when she disappeared on June 14, 1991. Paul and Karla had abducted her near her home. For days, they kept her captive, videotaping unspeakable acts before killing her and encasing her remains in concrete. Less than a year later, 15-year-old Kristen French vanished on her way home from school. Again, Paul and Karla filmed her torture and death. Both murders shocked the quiet suburbs of Ontario. The community lived in fear, unaware that the monsters responsible were a smiling, wedding-dressed couple living next door. The facade begins to crack. Despite their gruesome crimes, Paul and Karla managed to maintain a facade of normalcy. They married in a lavish ceremony in 1991, complete with white horses and champagne. To their friends, they were a picture-perfect couple. But behind the scenes, Paul's violence turned toward Karla. He beat her regularly, pushing her to the brink of collapse. By 1993, Karla could no longer hide the bruises. When police arrested Paul for domestic assault, it triggered a chain of events that would finally expose their darkest secrets. The tapes that changed everything. When police searched Bernardo's home, they discovered videotapes hidden behind a light fixture. What they saw on those tapes was beyond comprehension. Hours of footage showing Paul and Karla sexually assaulting and torturing young women. The tapes became the key evidence in one of Canada's most notorious criminal trials. Karla, realizing the evidence against her, struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for her testimony against Paul, she would receive a reduced sentence of 12 years. The controversial plea deal. Karla's plea bargain remains one of the most controversial in Canadian legal history. Many saw her as equally responsible, yet she was allowed to portray herself as a battered wife forced into submission. Only after the tapes were found did the full extent of her participation become clear. But by then, the deal was done. The public was outraged. The so-called deal with the devil allowed one of the country's most infamous criminals to serve only a fraction of the time most believed she deserved. Paul Bernardo's trial and life in prison. Paul was convicted in 1995 of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Even behind bars, Bernardo showed no remorse. Psychiatrists described him as a narcissistic psychopath. Manipulative, intelligent, and utterly devoid of empathy. He has repeatedly applied for parole over the years, but each time, his requests have been denied. He remains one of Canada's most reviled inmates. Karla Homolka's life after prison. After serving her 12-year sentence, Karla was released in 2005 and attempted to rebuild her life under a new identity. She married her lawyer's brother and had children. For years, she kept a low profile, living in Quebec, and later moving to the Caribbean before returning to Canada. When the media discovered her new life, public outrage resurfaced. Parents were horrified that a convicted killer was now living among them, especially one who had harmed children and participated in her sister's death. The psychological partnership. The story of Paul and Karla forces us to confront one of the most disturbing questions in criminology. How does love become a weapon? Their relationship was not built on mutual affection, but on reinforcement of each other's darkest impulses. Paul found in Karla a willing accomplice who fed his fantasies. Karla found in Paul a source of power and obsession. Together, they became something neither would have become alone. A deadly symbiosis of control and cruelty. Media frenzy and public fascination. The case of Bernardo and Homolka dominated headlines for years. It wasn't just the brutality of their crimes that fascinated the public, but the psychology behind them. How could two educated, seemingly normal people commit acts so vile? The tapes were never shown publicly, but their contents were described in court. Enough to burn horrifying images into the national consciousness. Documentaries, books, and TV dramas have since explored the case, but none can capture the full horror of the reality. The legacy of fear and reform. In the aftermath, Canada re-evaluated its legal and correctional systems. The handling of Karla's plea deal led to public demands for greater transparency and stricter review of sentencing agreements. The case also sparked debate on media ethics, victim privacy, and the psychological profiling of couples who kill together. Law enforcement agencies began studying the phenomenon of partnered psychopaths, where two individuals reinforce each other as capacity for violence. A nation's wound. Decades later, the names Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka still evoke dread. For Canadians, theirs is not merely a story of murder. It is a story of deception, betrayal, and the fragility of trust. They appeared as a fairy tale couple, but behind every smile was a scream. Behind every photograph, a crime scene. Their story is a chilling reminder that evil can hide in the most ordinary faces. Final reflection. Even after years have passed, the case of the killer couple continues to disturb the collective conscience. It challenges our understanding of morality and love, showing how obsession can twist the human soul into something monstrous. In their pursuit of control, Paul and Karla destroyed lives, including their own. What remains is a story that serves as both a warning and a reflection of humanity's darkest depths.